love, social convention, gender roles, and religion. Charlotte Bronte's most famous novel challenges ideas on all these topics, and we are here to discuss it. I'm Charlene.
And I'm Mike.
And this is Jane Eyre Files. Chapter 32. Depths of a Restless Sea. Hello, husband.
Hello, Lucis Naturi.
Oh, that's actually a term that I put on one of my old blogs, my live journal blog.
Really?
Yeah,
the live journal days?
The title of it.
Which means?
Freak of nature.
Yes. Had to brush up on my Latin. I want to make sure I looked and saw how it was spelled. Wasn't that in the footnotes of your book? Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but I did kind of Google it to be, okay, where's the emphasis? I saw a couple schwas in there. Lucis, it's not lucis or naturae or whatever. Lucis Naturi.
Okay,
sounds like one of the races from Star Trek, I think. My only other option that I saw was my nice, neat little soul.
Also a good turn of phrase, yeah.
Not
I like
Latin.
That.
It's not Latin.
You don't have to look up the meaning of that one.
Yes.
So
this is a. We've talked about this before, but we've had these what I would like to call like it's a transitional chapter. We've already met the characters, but we're not really getting to the meat of what's going to happen with them, the real conflict, right? And now we're just kind of setting it up, getting to know them a little bit more, and we're just seeing the daily life as it passes by. And so I think this is something that I would imagine when you see the film versions, kind of gets trimmed up a little bit.
Yes, that's true. But before we really deep dive into this chapter, I wanted to mention that we're doing an Instagram giveaway at Air Guide, where we're giving away a tote and a copy of my version of Jane Eyre, which is a Choose Your Own Adventure take. It's called The Governess of Thornfield, and a little Jane Eyre keychain. So nice. Check it out.
All right, social media giveaways out of the way. On to chapter 32. What does our Spark Notes summary say?
It begins. Jane's students become more familiar and endeared to her, and Jane becomes quite popular among them. At night, though, she has troubling nightmares that involve Rochester. I'm just going to interject right here. I don't feel like it's nightmares exactly, but okay, thank you, Spark Notes. Jane continues to pay attention to the relationship between St. John and Rosamond, who often visits the school when she knows St. John will be there. Rosamond asks Jane to draw her portrait, and as she is working on it one day, St. John pays her a visit. He gives her a new book of poetry, Sir Walter Scott's Marmion, and looks at the drawing. She offers to draw him a duplicate and then boldly declares that he ought to marry Rosamond. St. John admits that he loves her and is tempted by her beauty, but he explains that he refuses to allow worldly affection to interfere with his holy duties. The flirtatious, silly, and shallow Rosamond would make a terrible wife for a missionary. Suddenly, St. John notices something on the edge of Jane's paper and tears off a tiny piece. Jane is not certain why. With a peculiar look on his face, he hurries from the room.
Dun, dun, dun.
A little bit of mystery.
Yeah, foreshadowing, but it's such a throwaway part. We'll get into it a little bit later, but yeah, I don't remember that the first time I read the book.
Oh, yeah.
Now that I know what's happening, yeah, for sure.
So this chapter begins with Jane sort of giving compliments to the accomplishments of her rural scholars and the respect given to her by the working people now that she has become a little bit more ingrained in their society and they know her. And I don't know if it might seem a little backhanded in the way she seems surprised at the progress of the students.
Well, yeah, I guess it's what is that, nature versus nurture? Sometimes we say that where you come from, the background you come from, maybe it's harder to really blossom and develop. And now it's like, the funny part is Jane seems to really like the job, I wish it's like she should have just been patient. I know we talked about it on the show. It's like She can't just expect to change the world immediately.
Yeah.
And so if she's not so worried about her social standing, then she can just get busy with the job of transforming kids' lives, which I assume is one of the main reasons that people get into the teaching profession, right?
Yeah, that's true. It does take time for Jane to kind of get to know the people and I guess become more comfortable. And I feel like it's Charlotte Bronte showing that, there's, probably speaking to the pervading prejudice at the time that these people who are lower class, that they are probably set in their ways, like you said, nature versus nurture. They're thinking the nature, you can't change it. But Charlotte is showing how unfair and accurate these prejudices are. And we can't assume that these lower class, incapable of so-called refinement.
Now, do you think Charlotte did that intentionally? That she wanted to give Jane a flaw of some sort? That she has the same prejudice that a lot of the people of that era, which I'm assuming maybe Anne and Emily and Patrick had as well?
Or Charlotte had, yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder, because, one of the things that I find to be sort of a thought puzzle about this book does Jane have any flaws as a character? Because I feel like for the most part, the way Charlotte Bronte writes her, she doesn't feel like she's thinking of her as a flawed character in a way. Obviously she makes mistakes, but she's very young, and it's sort of she's presented in a way where she's really sort of blameless. So I don't know.
She's too passionate. She
Passionate?
loves too much.
Well, I think she was just doing the best she could. Obviously, she couldn't predict the secret, Rochester's secret, and the situation because it's very extraordinary. She's never given a reason to think that Rochester's lying to her,
Yeah, and I feel like sometimes authors are commended for writing characters that have flaws and
you think that's more
issues.
Realistic, right?
Well, yeah, but at the same time, it's like you want your books to be escapism, and maybe you don't necessarily want this character. The character, you don't want a character to be exactly like you, and maybe you can relate, but at the same time, maybe you want them to also be a little bit more, superhuman in a way, like a little bit.
Yeah,
more
there's definitely characters in books that are perfect, and that's the reason why we like them, I guess.
Practically perfect in every way.
Yes, Jane is Mary Poppins. Speaking of character studies, Jane is revealing a little bit more of her thoughts on Rosamond Oliver and giving the reader a more accurate picture of her. So I just wanted to kind of walk back a little bit of what I said in the previous episode where I was thinking, oh yeah, Rosamond Oliver is a example of a different kind of woman in Jane's story, where she's beautiful, but she's also kind and not entirely vain, which Jane does mention, oh well, she is a little bit vain. So
yeah, because when she's introduced in the previous chapter, you don't really know where she's coming, how much we're going to see of her.
Well,
right?
yeah, if she's going to be an important character at all.
Yeah, you talked about how much you like the dichotomy between Jane and Mary and Diana. And now there's another woman that
could be another Mary and Diana.
Could be another bestie. Even if there's a little bit of difference in the social standing.
Yeah.
But you never know. And I think because maybe there's no threat, at least for now, that Rosamond doesn't think that Jane and St. John are. So it's just like she can probably just relate to him and tell her how she feels about him. And
yeah.
And maybe help, right? Maybe Rosamond figures that if Jane is closer to St. John, she can kind of help plant that seed because St. John is so resistant. He's so cold and
right.
And then before we move on, I gotta mention how much I really love the use of the term visitress. Charlene, I swear we're going to work that into our everyday lexicon now.
If any woman comes to visit us,
they are now officially a visitress. Rosamond Oliver is Jane's visitress.
Right. Okay.
So I'm going to make that a thing.
There was a point you made earlier where you were talking about how this chapter feels a little bit just sort of just kind of filler,
Yeah, like I said, just getting to know the people. Everyday routines.
Everyday routines, that was it. So,
right.
But I wanted to make a point that I feel like that the fact that Jane is showing herself a little bit more comfortable with St. John, where she's a little more forthright and bold, that I think that is an important sort of turning point in this chapter, where it kind of reminds me of her interactions with Rochester.
Sure.
Because, we read this novel and we know Jane's thoughts because she's telling it to us as a reader, but she doesn't really share her personal thoughts or her feelings with a lot of people in the book. It's really important, character trait that, when she does share something with someone, then, that she's developing a good connection with them. And even though St. John, seems very cold and, kind of off-putting, she does seem to have a good relationship with him, and she feels comfortable enough to kind of address something that he clearly does not want to talk about.
Yeah.
Or he doesn't want to address. So
didn't we talk about that before, where it's like they let her in, and now she feels like, should she pay them back in some way? And your original thought was, oh, well, she should tell more about her story and and backstory. And I was like, no, maybe she shouldn't. But I think I like that idea, where as a debt of gratitude, now she's like, oh, I'm going to help you with your woman troubles.
Yeah.
She's had time to sit back and recuperate in this house, and so she's gotten to get a sense of these characters, the Rivers family. And so now, like you said, maybe they're getting a little bit closer. I mean, I'm sure not quite as romantically linked as Rochester, but like you said, more forthright, which I totally believe. And I wonder if it's, like you said, she has reached a certain comfort level, and maybe she feels compelled to engage with him because, St. John has put her in a good spot to build herself back up.
Right, yeah. And then, sort of a sweet project that Jane takes on, wanting to bring Rosamond and St. John together.
Yeah, I still think maybe that's why Rosamond is kind of getting a little bit closer with Jane. Is that you hope it's just kind of a wingman thing.
That's very manipulative, but I don't know if I can believe that of sweet Rosamond.
Not manipulative. I'm sure we've mentioned it on the show. This is how it works in real life. If you like somebody, you get to know their friends,
right,
or their siblings or relatives, and then you make a good impression on them, so that they can go tell the object of your affection how great you are.
All right. I guess that is one point of view.
Yeah. And then and I know this from personal experience, because I saw people do it with me, and now I've had an opportunity to pass it on myself, is usually when people find love themselves, they want to make sure that others find it just as quickly.
Yeah, that's a good point.
How many times did you go to a wedding by yourself, and whether it be the bride or another married woman at the party is just constantly wanting to try to set you up with someone else? Oh, this is my cousin so-and-so, he's single. And you're just like, it's okay. But then they're just, no, because they're so happy in that moment. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, Jane and Rochester are split up at the moment, but Jane is still in love.
And she knows the benefits of true love.
Yeah, because, even if she's having nightmares, apparently, about him, I feel like she still has these strong feelings, and she's just like, I wonder if maybe it'll help loosen St. John up, or if, like I said, or maybe Rosamond could be as happy as she is. Maybe round her out. It sounds like Rosamond's got a pretty good life.
Oh, yeah.
But also not just because she's, financially stable, but she seems really happy in what she does. And so
she's given a lot of freedom. She seems like she's well educated too, so she has a lot of potential.
And I'm sure she probably takes a lot of pride in the school and all that stuff. And so, like, this idea that if there's one aspect of her life that's not quite fulfilled, and that's this cold preacher, and maybe he could be the
very handsome cold preacher,
handsome, pale, Apollo-looking cold preacher. And so, and I think what I found funny too is that, did you notice that St. John does seem shocked that Jane would want him to marry Rosamond and give up his Christian duties, and he has this, there's just paragraphs of him describing why he doesn't want it to happen, just a little bit over the top, little bit over expressive.
Yeah, you clearly see he's very devout, and this brings me to one of my pet analysis of Jane Eyre is comparing St. John and Helen Burns. You remember Helen, right?
Best character in the book.
Yeah, because it's we're presented with these two characters who, their life is predominantly lived according to God's will and his scriptures. Mm-hmm. And, early on, Helen Burns, she says to her, "Hush, Jane, you think too much of the love of human beings." And then later, St. John says, what did he say?
"Fancy me yielding and melting as I am doing, human love rising like a freshly opened fountain in my mind and overflowing with sweet inundation all the field I have so carefully and with such labor prepared." Yeah,
so I feel like they both kind of downplay the importance of human love. because they're thinking more about God's love, or their sort of eternal reward is more important.
Yeah, and it goes back to, again, that central theme that I brought up before of love versus righteousness. And Helen unfortunately does not make it long enough to really experience human love. Maybe she might have a different opinion if she had.
That's true. She's very young at that point. She doesn't seem to have lived a great life. Her father doesn't really seem to pay attention to her, and then she's not well taken care of at the school. So
yeah, whereas with St. John, it's actually right there in front of him, but yet he's just pushing it away and pushing it down out of some, like I said, some sort of duty, which on the one hand, I don't know, seems a little bit ill-informed.
Yeah. But I guess part of my pet analysis is thinking, will Helen Burns grow up to be a little bit more like St. John? Because then there's a quote that I'll pull from this chapter where, St. John is telling Jane that his belief in God has refined the base materials of his nature. So he says, quote, "From the minute germ natural affection, she has developed the overshadowing tree philanthropy. From the wild stringy root of human uprightness, she has reared a due sense of the divine justice." And that sort of the natural affection, which, that's what Helen has. And she also had that sort of philanthropic mind where she's, reaching out to Jane because she can see that she's, hurt and alone at this school. And she kind of gives her advice, and then from the wild stringy root of human uprightness, that has turned into divine justice, which I feel like in Helen's case was more like Helen trying to tell Jane that, leave it to God, all her anger and stuff that she had against Mrs. Reed, divine justice will help you out. So that's kind of but then of course, I feel like Jane, St. John has this sort of ambition. That's something that's like the leading character trait that Charlotte Bronte and Jane kind of establish. And then, St. John says in that same passage in this chapter that of the ambition to win power and renown for my wretched self, she has formed the ambition to spread my master's kingdom, to achieve victories for the standard of the cross. So perhaps Helen would have gone into a similar route of wanting to spread God's word. Yeah,
I think that probably would have been her thing for sure.
That would have fit her.
Yeah, like I said, I was surprised that we're gonna mention how like Helen doesn't really consider herself to have these great talents.
Yes,
and she's kind of resigned to die so that she could join God in heaven. But I wonder, Charlene, do you think should she have aspired to live so that she could too be a missionary or a nun or just someone like St. John so that she could spread the word? It seemed like she was devout enough.
Yeah, I feel like she would have been a great orator. I'm not sure if she would have had that opportunity open to her. So at that, in that time for a woman, you're probably not going to be able to do that. But
what if you're married to a missionary?
Oh yeah, she could help these children and other parents in these countries where, the missionary is trying to teach people. So obviously, yeah, she can definitely help spread the word.
Learn a random language, Hindustani, I think.
She seemed plenty intelligent to be able to pick it up.
Yeah. And sometimes I feel like when people are devout enough, they just, like I said, they feel a certain sense of duty. Or that they have to, like I said, whether they're following the Bible and they feel like they have to live their life a certain way, and even if it means sacrificing and doing all these things to kind of sacrifice their own happiness so that for the eternal good.
Right.
And there's a quote from right at the end, near the end of Helen's life, where she says, "By dying young, I shall escape great sufferings. I had not qualities or talents to make my way very well in the world. I should have been continually at fault." Sometimes I wonder, like, is that a sign sometimes of Christians where they get very guilty?
Oh,
do Christians ever experience guilt?
I believe so. I believe that's sort of a thing. Yeah.
And so they kind of feel in the way like I'm not doing enough. There's still much more I can do. I think we've established that St. John feels that way, right?
Yeah, that definitely does seem to be something where, I think St. John wants to do more, so that's why he felt guilty being a pastor in a small village where he, obviously he feels like he has a lot of good qualities that he could give to other people to bring them closer to God, I guess. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's definitely something that St. John seems to have in common with Helen. And, in this book, I feel like both characters also emphasize looking beyond what you want to do in this life, sort of your personal goals and your happiness is less important than gaining glory and, being one with God. And I feel like it's a little bit of a depressing outlook to me.
Yeah. I mean, we all have a very finite time here, and so you might want to enjoy as much, make the most of it.
It's saying it's not it's worthless. Like, just, you're trying to get past this point, It's kind of sad.
Stop and smell the roses. Mm-hmm. That's what I always think. I mean, I know it's not quite the same comparison, but I had this happen to me when I was in high school, where my father was in the military, so we moved around a lot when I was a kid, and we moved in the middle of my junior year of high school. And as soon as we got to the new town, would have been in Kentucky, there was pretty much a thought that we were going to leave as soon as I graduated high school. So I didn't make a lot of close friendships. Mm-hmm. I didn't bother to, I was very young. I graduated very young. And so a lot of my friends were freshmen and sophomores. Mm-hmm. I had very few friends that were in the senior class with me. And I feel like, looking back, I didn't really enjoy that year as much, because I was like, well, I'm leaving anyway.
Oh, yeah.
And so, I still have a few friends from that time, but I look back and I do kind of regret that. I wish I would have enjoyed that a little bit more. I would have enjoyed my time. It is
difficult if you're leaving, but
yeah, especially when you had that knowledge ahead of time. And
but
so
Helen,
I was shuffling off this mortal coil of Kentucky.
I was going to say, Helen didn't have a lot of time, and she didn't really take advantage of it. But again, maybe she didn't have the opportunity to. Stuck at Lowood.
Well, but I wonder, did she already feel like
she was going to die
even before she got sick?
Oh,
did she just assume that, well, there's a lot of childhood mortality, and so I'm sure it's probably going to be me?
Oh, I don't know. Yeah. At least she was already mentally prepared for it, it seems.
Yeah, still the best character in the book.
Well, one last thing to wrap up my comparison of Helen and St. John is that both Helen and St. John come into Jane's life when her emotional turmoil is very distressing to her. Because that again, passion versus reason. Her passion is kind of getting the better of her, and they show Jane how relying on God and gives them comfort in how they live. So St. John is clearly a character that showcases all reason and no feeling or emotion. And do you think Helen showcases that?
Well, I feel like she seems warmer, but she can also be construed as being a little self-righteous and condescending, and but I feel like she does care for Jane, but she's also seems so resolved to die that she doesn't express enough emotion while she's alive. I feel like St. John is the same, but without the warmth. But does he really care for Jane, or is she just another person in his life?
Oh, well, I don't know if he's very, he feels deep affection for her, but I feel like he has respect for her, and that's probably the best you're going to get from St. John.
Well, yeah, because like I said, she seems to make religion a very important aspect of her life. The fact that she took on this teaching gig without even giving it a second thought.
Yeah, she's very hardworking, and she's also intelligent, and I guess probably doesn't seem like a silly person to him, Rosamond maybe.
And he's warming up to her and then feeling more comfortable around her, and where they can have these conversations. And then she could say, hey, what about that Rosamond girl? You should totally go for her.
And he says, let me think about it. No.
Yeah. And then he does one of the more bizarre acts, because when you know the rest of the story, it's like, oh, okay. And then when I watch the film adaptations, I know this scene. But when I'm reading the book, I do not remember. What does he do? She's drawing, and he grabs.
He notices some of her scratch paper, and he just tears off a piece of the paper and says bye.
Yeah. And like I said, Charlotte makes it a point to just bring that up, where I feel like the first time I read it, I was like, oh, okay, whatever. Mm-hmm. And then when I was rereading it now, I was thinking, okay, I know that moment's probably going to come. It's just going to be some sort of throwaway. But no, she does kind of call it out.
Right, yeah.
And I'm like, oh, because if you're reading it for the first time, you just it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah. But the fact that it is kind of mentioned and a little bit dwelled upon, you're just like, okay, that's going to mean something.
Yeah. Charlotte's pretty good at foreshadowing, right?
Yes. So, yeah, we'll find out more about that later. And for the interesting context portion of this episode, I did want to point out a moment in this chapter where when St. John gives Jane a book, Jane goes off on kind of a tangent, really praising this work as a part of the, quote, golden age of modern literature, where she even says, poetry destroyed, genius banished? No. Mediocrity? No. Do not let envy prompt you to the thought. No, they not only live, but reign and redeem, and without their divine influence spread everywhere, you would be in hell, the hell of your own meanness. It's a little bit extravagant for...
Very, very poetic.
Oh, yes.
I like the fact that she's talking about there's no way that poetry's dead. And you've got this book of poetry, and yet Charlotte's words to describe what Jane is saying and doing is very poetic.
Yeah,
it's kind of very self-reflexive in that way, yeah.
That's true, yes. So
what is that book?
Oh, yes. So the book that St. John gives Jane is called Marmion by Sir Walter Scott. It was published in 1808 and is a historical romance in verse of 16th century Scotland and England.
Have you read Marmion?
I have, actually. I have a copy of it.
You do have a copy? Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
I don't really remember it that well, although right before we recorded, I kind of read up a little bit on the plot. So it is full of intrigue. There's a Lord Marmion who falls in love with this beautiful woman, and she refuses him. She's in love with this other man. So Marmion has a duel with this man, and he shoots him and doesn't kill him, and then kind of gets banished, and he, supposed to duel at that time, I believe.
Oh, really? So Lord Marmion didn't have a problem throwing away his shot.
And then, the rich woman, she goes and joins the nunnery. And then there's a big battle in the end. The wronged lord was going to finally confront Lord Marmion, and then Lord Marmion dies, and then the wrong lord, he gains all the glory. And that's how it ends, sort of.
Wow. Yeah, that's a pretty tangled web, isn't it?
Right. Yeah, I think you might have heard that this story is the origin of the famous phrase, "Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive." Right? Often attributed to Shakespeare.
Did Shakespeare ever use it? I don't know. Yeah, people just assume.
It sounds Shakespearean.
It does.
But yeah, Charlotte was a fan of Scott and frequently referenced his works in her own stories. And another point I wanted to bring up was the fact that Jane references Marmion as a new publication seems to indicate that this part of the story is set soon after 1808. But it has also been pointed out that a new edition of the novel with a new introduction by Scott was published in 1830.
So, yeah, we don't really have framing for events that are going on because we had the Luddite riots reference as well. And when was that supposed to take place?
That was around 1812, I believe. So, that doesn't quite match up. It's a little bit all over the place.
Yeah, published in 1847, this book, right? Mm-hmm. And so...
And then, when you get to the end of the book, you get to Jane saying that she's kind of writing this like in a period of time later, 10 years later. So, that's where you're trying to figure out, okay, then how, when was this written, and then when did this take place? So it's Charlotte, I don't know if she was doing this on purpose or if she just had things mixed up.
Well, yeah. And like I said, Sir Walter Scott, is he somebody very prevalent in that era? Why does she seem to keep bringing him up in her work?
Oh, she did read him, I think, when she was fairly young, like read some of his works, and she really loved him, and I think probably her family, her sisters also loved his works too. So
give him a shout out.
He was a popular author.
Yeah,
author of Ivanhoe.
That's why I know that name. Never read it. Did you read it?
I have not read Ivanhoe, actually.
Okay. And we joke about it, but I've not read a lot of famous works of literature. Mm-hmm. But I can picture that book being like a school assignment in one of my high school classes. Not my class, but like one of my fellow classmates had a different English class or something. And
right.
They read that as well. But
Well, that is all for the interesting context. And now we go on to our meaningful passage or quote. Mike, why don't you share yours first?
Well, I've got a whopper.
Oh, right.
For you here.
Okay.
It really stood out to me because it's very long, it's very dramatic, and I just kept wondering, like, how long, when's this sentence going to end? What I'm going to read for you right now is all one sentence.
Okay.
Okay, are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay. Jane says, quote, "At this period of my life, my heart far oftener swelled with thankfulness than sank with dejection. And yet, reader, to tell you all, in the midst of this calm, this useful existence, after a day passed in honorable exertion amongst my scholars, an evening spent in drawing or reading contentedly alone, I used to rush into strange dreams at night, dreams many-colored, agitated, full of the ideal, the stirring, the stormy, dreams where, amidst unusual scenes, charged with adventure, With agitating risk and romantic chance, I still again and again met Mr. Rochester, always at some exciting crisis. And then the sense of being in his arms, hearing his voice, meeting his eye, touching his hand and cheek, loving him, being loved by him, the hope of passing a lifetime at his side would be renewed with all its first force and fire. Whew. That's all one sentence.
I mean, it's all one large thought of hers.
Yeah, and I think like what's interesting is like, you know, it just shows that Rochester, no matter what she does to focus on other things in her life, he's still never going to leave her mind.
Sure.
That's how profound their love was and what she meant to him.
Right.
And I love it because I was reading it and I'm like, I joke about this with you all the time when we watch movies because I love to see the technical aspects. Like I can appreciate something that's shot really well, even if it's not well written or well acted. And if you ever watch a scene where you're like, it's a really long take, and you're like, I don't think there's been an edit. And you're like, sometimes if it's like 2-3 minutes, and sometimes if I see a shot like that, I'll rewind it when I'm done and be like, was this all one long take? I'm amazed. I love long tracking shots and stuff. So I'm reading this sentence and I'm like, well, this is all one thing. She's just got to get this thought out.
Yeah.
And she's just like, no periods, man. We're just going straight through. And so if you're counting at home, I did count it.
Oh.
There are 2 colons, 1 semicolon, 4 hyphens, not counting like hyphenated words, but 4 hyphens to separate points. And there are a whopping 22 commas in that sentence. So memorable in that regard, yes.
Oh, okay. Well, obviously that is also the quote I picked.
Really? The whole thing?
Well, yes, because I think I mentioned in the previous episode where I like the quotes that reference Rochester, that this is probably, I think, the last quote that before certain things happen that she references Rochester, and it's my favorite. I just love the idea too, how she says, I used to rush into strange dreams at night. Like she didn't just fall asleep. Like it was like waiting for her, all this emotion that she kind of like kept down during the day where she was trying to work and she was being a good teacher. And then at night, it's like she gives vent to all of this regret and love and emotion, and it just kind of washes over her. And then 9 a.m., or I think it was, next day, she's ready for school and she's totally composed. And I just love that image of her just kind of indulging it and then going back to work. And again, passion versus reason.
Sure.
It's kind of, it's not quite balanced. It's kind of over mastering her at one point to another. So. Yeah.
And listeners, you can't see us obviously, but when I was halfway through that quote, I looked up and Charlene was smiling at me. So I had a very good idea that perhaps you had also chosen this one. That is now 3. Oh God! I haven't actually been keeping track. I'm pretty sure it was the 3rd out of 32 that we picked the same one. Okay. So about 10%, a little bit less than 10%.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I don't know if your goal is try to not pick what I pick.
Not necessarily. I mean, some of them has been a little difficult. I think that we had the same quote one time on one of the shorter chapters, and it was very memorable. So it was kind of obvious. But this one, to me, like I said, one long tracking shot. I'm like, she's still talking. She's still talking, and this is the same thought. And I was like, wait a minute, no period, no. 22 commas.
Yeah, great quote. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review on your preferred podcast platform. This really helps us grow and reach new listeners. If you want to talk Jane Eyre with me online, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at AirGuide. That's EYRE.
And if you want to hear more from me, I host my own podcast called Out of Touchstone, where my good friend Chad and I discuss all the films that Disney produced for their Touchstone Pictures label. You can also find me on Twitter at Mike DeKalb.
Thank you, and farewell for the present.